Now we can start.
I should have shown up like on the call, like I'm about to hop in a meeting. That makes you look extra busy.
Welcome, Paul. Welcome. So let's get started. The upcoming PTO for the team members is listed inside the 14.9 planning issue. If you haven't added yours, consider adding it just for clarity for the rest of the team. And the next Friends and Family Day is the 25th of this month. Amy, you're going to be out for some time.
Yep, I'll be out for a week and a day. Instead of setting a defined backup, just go to the docs channel and whoever's online at the time will pick up the work. Don't break anything.
Okay, that's fine. I'll just consistently bug Axel. God love him. So in terms of EM updates, so our say-do ratio, 6%, 7% not counting reprioritized issues. The total issues, 16, closed 1. So this is something I have a note on, and so does Eric. Eric, do you want to voice your point first, and then I'll voice mine?
We can save maybe the deep analysis for a retro, but I would like to just kind of ask, as we're starting to plan for 14.9, if there was anything in particular we could have done better to plan for 14.8, if there were blockers that came up, if we didn't have well enough to find deliverables, or if things just got away from you. Like, no blame, I just wanted to know so that we can avoid over scheduling 14.9.
So I'll jump in and voice my points, and because I think it'll be pretty closely related to Eric's. So this is a metric I personally have not been tracking too closely over the last couple of months due to all of the shifting goals. We've had allocations going on, security burn downs, and to be honest, a lot of what we've been working on doesn't lend particularly well to small issues that can be closed out relatively quickly. They tend to be long-lived big efforts. So I would like to propose that moving forward to start working with this percentage, we start looking at more granular issues that are closely aligned on a one-to-one basis, an issue for a merge. And if an issue is going to spawn multiple merges, we actually consider breaking that into multiple issues housed by a parent epic. I think that'll give a little bit more clarity, and it should help us effectively close out more issues over a milestone and raise this figure. How does that idea sit with people?
Well, I'll jump in. I think it's a great idea, and for many reasons, but one of them is because it's aligned with some of the more agile approaches that and methodologies that we've been discussing, and dogfooding some of the new iterations and velocity stuff. And for that to work and actually provide useful, meaningful data that has value and predictive planning, and knowing what our velocity is and how much we can actually do as a team, you have to have small issues that are estimated low, and anything larger than that needs to get broken up and never re-estimated, because the fact that you got something wrong is part of the calculation. But if you know something is going to be big, you should definitely break it up into small ones. And the MR issue, and they're rethinking this hierarchy all the way up, groups and work items, and all of this is being redone. But down the line, to just have a more one-to-one relationship between what's actually estimated and what's worked on, and not have them explode into scope creep, which blows off metrics and the ability to predict. That's my thoughts on it. I think it's a great idea.
I'm gonna jump in, and so correct me if I'm wrong, David, but we're thinking of we've had really big efforts we're working on, but we need to capture the actual work into small deliverable chunks. Yeah, I mean, that sounds great. I think just the thing that we want to be cautious of is letting the need for small deliverable chunks not add friction or a hesitancy to doing big ambiguous work which needs to be done. And that's totally has happened in the past, where we become so metrics driven, we're just thinking about what are the low hanging fruit stuff we can just capture. We're not doing what actually delivers value. And but yeah, I mean, you look at our MR rate, we're clearly doing stuff. You know, I don't know what our MR rate means either. Maybe we're not doing stuff. It looks green, so I feel like
It's narrow. I know that.
oh,
I don't
okay.
know what that
Yeah,
means, but
yeah.
it's narrow.
It looks I maybe slim or fit. You know, yeah. Yeah, that's my biggest concern. But I feel like our team has a culture where we really care about delivering the value rather than just the metrics, where I think that's not a concern, but that's just my 2 cents.
Oh, did you take your hand down, Dennis? I saw you.
Oh,
there.
I was preparing to speak. I'm sorry, and it's
Okay, sorry.
so
go ahead.
yeah. Let's consider it's still raised, but now it's down. What I wanted to say is that this milestone was a bit special in terms of really big efforts from all different angles, and it's natural that the ratio is not perfect. I do agree with Paul here that we should be very careful with being any metrics driven and saying like, okay, we have the big effort, but we still have to, like, in the context of this big effort, we have to make sure that we push some smaller deliverables, smaller chunks, because technically, like, we have a concrete example. We're talking about, for example, integrating the content editor in the product to edit the markdown files, or about the VS Code. Those things are. It would be very sort of naive to consider that, okay, we should start sending the MRs towards these goals right away, because we are still in the spike stage, and things might not turn out to be the way we anticipate them at the moment. So if we say that, okay, in the context of the big efforts, we still have to push some smaller changes. This might mean that we will shoot ourselves in the foot, meaning we will have to push forward for the effort that we have contributed to in terms of smaller MRs. So that might be a bit dangerous. I still understand that we are measured by some metrics, and I don't have any solution of how we can still show the metrics but concentrate on the big efforts nevertheless. But just wanted to raise the concern that we should not fall into this trap of like pursuing smaller MRs all during any effort we are doing. Yeah.
Eric, I think you had your hand raised first, or it was either you
Yeah,
or Chad.
No, I think
first on
Chad.
mine.
It's sourced.
I just wanted to follow up on Paul's point. Yes, we absolutely should not use this as a justification not to tackle large ambiguous things. And then like big design up front, that's an anti-pattern, but sometimes you need it to make sure you're not going down the wrong paths. The way I like to see it captured is there's small exploratory issues. It's like, okay, here's this thing that we don't know about. We're going to make an issue that's pointed to explore that. And then we finish that issue. And maybe there's something else that follows off of that, but it's still captured in small, granular, estimated issues. And David and I have talked about starting an MR for our team page in the handbook that writes all this stuff down. Handbook first and captures it, and we collaborate with the whole team on what it means and how we actually want to do this.
Yeah, and that's in line with our quarterly OKR to document and refine our processes, which is great. We can talk about this more in the retro. I'm just from a product perspective, I'm concerned if I'm over scheduling you, right? If we commit to issues that are, in my mind, look small and fairly well defined, but then we pair them up on your plate with these big technical discussions. If you're unable to context switch, or if something that's less well defined ends up taking longer, and then those other deliverables slip milestone to milestone, I just need to know, right? That's all. So I don't want to make the mistake again and artificially deflate our numbers. I agree we don't need to be statistic driven, and I 100% agree with all the comments about how we should leave room for these investigations. I just want to make sure that what we say we're going to deliver is at least closely reflective of what we can deliver. And obviously that comes with more predictability, more upfront time planning and stuff. So we'll keep working on it. I just want to make sure if there were any major red flags that came up in this milestone, we could talk about it. I'll get to the other hands, but we don't need to belabor this point until the retro. David, I think you had your hand up next.
Joy to taking notes and speaking at the same time. Yeah, I think this is going to be a really fantastic discussion for our retro where we can get into this in depth. This is something like on our team, we do this particularly well. We're really good. We have big, lofty goals and big aspirations in our team, and we're really good at setting our priorities and moving towards it. And all I would like us to do is look at, can we refine our process a little bit without gamifying it? Because I also don't want to gamify this metric. I have no interest in that. It means nothing. It just creates overhead. So if we can refine this process a little bit and make life easier on people, fantastic. If we can't, that's still okay. We still work towards great stuff and we deliver it, but we can get into it in the retro.
I have a couple of questions to ask everybody, but if we want to keep moving on, maybe you can save this for the end.
Yeah, maybe throw them into the Q&A. Enrique, I think I saw you had your hand raised. Do you have a point you want to voice before I move on?
No, I'm gonna leave it for the retro.
All right, super stuff. My last 2 points, I'll keep them super quick. So as usual, we are in the higher end for our team's MR rate. The editor team is consistently one of the higher teams in terms of narrow MR rate. So there's nothing that we really have to do different there. We're killing it. So thank you everybody for continuing to work in a iteration-based approach. It reflects well on the team.
And I'll just point out that the fact that the say-do is low, but the MR rate is high, like goes exactly to that point. We're doing more MRs than issues or something. The one-to-one will have to help with that.
Yeah, exactly. It should be an automatic win in theory. In terms of OKRs, I'm going to change slightly how we communicate OKRs. So normally for the last couple of months, I've been logging the OKRs in Ally, and I've been communicating them once a month here in the meetings. What I am going to do is I am going to be creating a per quarter issue that will live for the entirety, and I will be updating the progress of the OKRs, and that will be linked in the weekly team announcements to ensure that everybody has a good idea of how we're progressing on our OKRs. And it'll also invite you to leave feedback or ask questions in an asynchronous setting. So moving forward, OKRs will be hopefully much more highly visible, and they'll be done completely asynchronously. And hopefully that is a little better for people. Oh, yes. Good call, Paul. I will do that.
I can do it. I think I can do it. I'll try to.
There's a character limit.
Super. I'll hand it over to Eric, who will talk us through some of the product updates.
So thanks. The general consensus that we've heard, and using Fran and Chad's return into the fold, offers us a good opportunity to take a step back, refocus, look at the next year ahead of us, and come up with some priorities. These discussions that have been happening in issues and on Slack about big technical challenges have been fantastic, and I'm trying to wrap my head around them, sequence them, come up with which ones are the most important to solve first, and which ones are the most valuable to customers. So this is what I have. It's open for discussion. I'm not just trying to monologue, but the next 2 to 3 milestones at least, I want to continue pushing forward with VS Code, even though we don't have a formal decision, stamp of approval from product leadership or anything like that. There have been no major red flags for me right now. We're continuing to do validation on the solution itself, as well as legal and AppSec and other concerns. Until we get a hard no from any of those, I don't want to lose momentum. So Paul will continue to dedicate his time. We'll pull in back end as needed to help flesh out proofs of concept and start breaking down into issues and make a plan to actually do this. I will say that there are some in very high levels of product leadership that are extremely excited about this approach. So there would have to be some pretty big red flags in the data coming back from research that users would reject this change, which I don't think will happen, or a major security or legal challenge to overcome to derail this. This appears to be the direction we'll head in. So that's that. And Amy, yes, we've been talking with Tomas. He's been fantastic to pair with, although I'm putting words in Paul's mouth, but they've been pairing together on it. We hope to use some of the great work he's done to bolster our offering and make it consistent and things like that.
It's literally working on an MR for him while you were talking. So yeah, cool.
Yeah. And I actually have a regular sync with him just because I used to work with him on Gitter, and we just keep in touch. So he's very much aware of what we're working on.
Cool. Thank you.
Now the content editor is our other major opportunity here. I have realized that the preservation of unchanged markdown is the biggest blocker to a lot of what we want to do here. I feel, David and I both feel like swarming on this challenge will unblock a lot of potential later in the year. So I think over the next 2 to 3 milestones, getting as much front end support to implement Enrique's architecture that he's working on will be our primary focus. And that will lead into, I see, Enrique, you've left a question down in the open Q&A. We'll talk about it more, but I'll just say this is one of our top priorities for the front end team right now. We just need to get this work done. It's a big effort and we can swarm on it. So Enrique, you've got some notes. I don't know if you want to voice those over.
Sure. So you put a note there about start breaking the work into issues. That's something that we should probably start collaborating on next week. I finished working on the technical design document. I just wanted to spend 2 or 3 days investigating the problem a bit more, because I think that we should answer some important questions up front about the architecture. So hopefully I can again share with everyone and share also in the spike document and continue the discussion and start planning.
That's fantastic. The timing sounds great. Just so everybody's aware, like the 14.9 milestone board might be a little light until we flesh out those issues, because those will be ones that we roll right into if possible. So that I'll leave room in 14.9 to just continue working on this is what I'm getting at. And now welcome back, Fran, officially. Well, almost officially. I don't know exactly when we can say that you're back, but it's great to have you back on the call.
No, I'm sorry. I got dragged into a different location.
Yeah,
just came to
you're
say hi.
allocated to the, yeah.
Bye. No, it's good to be
Oh
back.
man, it's good to have you back.
I mean, I really enjoy what we do or the features we have. So it was a really entirely opposite topic, and I don't really like it. So I'm glad I'm back.
I'll be sure to tag them in this recording and make sure that no, I'm just kidding. But you did great work. I'm glad you're back. It was very, very important work that you did. But now that you are back, there's a couple backend tasks that we've had lingering, improving performance of wikis and stuff like that. But the bigger effort over the next 2-3 milestones, as you called out in the planning issue, is moving away from Golem and working on those Gitly RPCs. I think that's going to be the biggest value for the wiki and the code base as a whole. We have big picture, long-term vision for, wiki pages stuff, but we can make improvements now that will help the 500,000 people that are using wiki already. So that'll be your primary focus over the next couple 2-3 milestones. And moving on to pages, which is not officially our category yet in the handbook, but welcome again to Vishal and Cassio. We're very excited to have you and very excited to take on pages. There are lots of onboarding tasks and you got to get up to speed. We're not going to put too much pressure on you in the next couple milestones, but as you do get your feet under you and you start picking up issues, we'll focus on the work related to rate limiting and just stability of pages. And then there's a couple really long-standing features that I'd like to just dig in and understand if there's a way to do them. Things like the DNS wildcard issue that I pinged David on. Review apps for wikis is another one that sounds like there might be an easier solution than is implied. So we'll start working on those when you're ready, but don't feel pressured. And then lastly, static site editor, we're looking to remove it in 15.0. Thanks to Chad for jumping in early on some MRs to move this along and being proactive there. There shouldn't be a ton of extra work on our plate. I may try and get a blog article written. I may ask one of you to put a little link or banner in the static site editor view to just announce the deprecation to anybody that's coming in. But the biggest work is the redirect, and then we can get to Enrique's question about the alternatives there. So that's our strategy. You'll notice that there's a couple things missing. Snippets. I don't expect a lot of investment over really this year unless something changes. So let's not worry too much about that right now. And source editor, while there are probably going to be some issues, and especially if they start investigating using it for comments and notables and things like that, we'll want to support them. But I think right now we need to swarm on the content editor, preservation of unchanged markdown, then return to things like the multi-file experience and things like that afterwards. So we'll continue doing validation over the next 2-3 milestones on that, but we probably won't kick off a big effort for source editor until 14.10 15.0. That's it. I tried to be quick. So any other questions on those, or we can move to open Q&A?
All right, super stuff. Thank you so much, Eric. Sounds really, really good. Sounds like a really, really fantastic long-term clear plan. Really, really appreciate it. It's going to be good stuff. And again, welcome Cassio, welcome Vishal. Excited to have you. Yep, take your time, get ramped up. Looking forward to some really cool stuff with pages. It's one of the more loved categories by our users, and I think we're going to be able to do some really cool stuff with it. In terms of the Q&A, I have the first question. I've been bugging everybody about this question, but now that our team is finally back together in a holistic sense, I would like to look at how I've been planning milestones with Eric, and if there are things that I can do better to either make things more clear for y'all or to make life a little more straightforward. And it kind of feeds into the conversation above. But any and all feedback, you can provide it asynchronously or synchronously. Yeah, if you've got any suggestions, please let me know.
So this is related to the say-do stuff. So I realized we're gonna talk about that in the retro, but I had some questions that maybe just wanted to plant some seeds so we could be pondering this and maybe discuss more in detail as we think more about it. Before I do that, I do want to give so much love to our pages feature. Like that is definitely one of my favorite features of GitLab. We do it so much better than GitHub. And I think users that use it and have used both GitHub and GitLab, this is a clear, huge win that GitLab has over, I think, any of competing offer. Pages with the baked in CI and stuff is really nice. So that is exciting that we get to own it, and it's an exciting feature to work on. So thanks, Katsio and Vishal. Please don't break it. I'm joking. The question I want to ask, talking specifically about the say-do, which kind of goes into the milestone planning question. When we have these big issues that are ambiguous and there's something we know we got to wrestle with and we got to talk about it, it's not clear like what the artifact of it is, like, and maybe that just needs to be a requirement for every issue we have of like, this is the expected artifact and this is, how we can close it. And once we have this artifact, then we know this is closable. If we've had some sort of discussion, maybe the artifact is, okay, we've put that, maybe even just that discussion, we've added it to some sort of document, architecture document or something like that. And I don't know if, I think sometimes issues themselves are the artifacts, and I'm just thinking making it really clear when there's a large topic at hand, what's the scope of this issue, and maybe thinking about the artifacts can help. What are your guys' maybe thoughts on that?
That's an interesting question. For me, I think, and again, you have to be careful not to gamify it, but I think in this way, ultimately, it would be useful if we could maybe look at translating spikes as we've been doing into really well fleshed out epics, I think, with small, very granular, very well understood issues that live underneath it. And I think that's like, our MR rate is already very, very high. So we do a lot of really good work with iteration. So maybe it's getting more and more into this habit of using epics and then smaller issues more.
I think that's almost an artifact of a discussion, is like, sometimes you don't even know what's the implementation plan going to look like. So it's hard to break it out. And so maybe one flavor of Spike here's just an architecture plan, but we still have to maybe wrestle with, here's how we're actually going to implement it. And so maybe defining architecture plan is a legit artifact. This is what we expect out of this. And then implementation plan is we actually have epics and issues created. Maybe that's a good terminology and way for us to organize this kind of stuff.
But couldn't, for example, in that case, the outcome of a spike be that artifact, for example?
Yeah, I think so. But I think spikes come in two flavors. I think you do have, sometimes it's just an architecture we're trying to find. But I think sometimes, okay, we need to break this out. Let's play with it to figure out what are the issues that we're gonna. I see, as I've done a couple of spikes here, and as I've seen participate in others, I see these two flavors coming up. One is just, we just need to really wrestle with this at a high level. I don't even know what issues are going to come from this, but what's the architecture we could do? And then the other flavor is, okay, we can actually create issues from this. And that's, I think that'll probably help scope these a lot.
and the intention to focus on small iterations, small deliverables, like it helps in that because you don't want to get stuck in scope creep. You always want to have something that you're delivering as part of looking into this, even if it's a document saying, okay, here's what we know, and it was completely wrong from what we thought before. You know, that's an issue, and then you go on to the next step to figure out more. And if there's a larger context, we create an effort to capture that. That's no reason not to create small granular issues.
Just to voice the topic that I put in there. I think the handbook mentions to have a threshold of 5, the weight 5 on an issue to split in smaller issues. On my former group, we used to do that as well. So issues that were 8-5, weight 5, we usually break it in smaller ones. But beyond that, I think spiking on those issues before breaking smaller issues should be a good practice. It could be a good practice. And I agree with Paul, having a well-defined expected output of the spike can improve it even more. Just to pass it over.
Yeah, and we've not to get into the weeds, but as far as estimation, like I've discussed this in the past, I'm a fan of Fibonacci, like the 1, 3, 1, 2, 3, 0, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, and like an 8 is never prioritized. It always has to be broken up. A 5 is like it really should be broken up, but if it's like just a bunch of grunt work, really straightforward, low risk, maybe you prioritize 5. Other than that, everything should be a 1 or 2 or 3. That's how I think of it. But again, we're gonna take a draft of this in the handbook page and get everybody's thoughts and try to come to an agreement on what we want our processes to be.
So I think that it's important to look retroactively into what we did last year. When we were working in settings and navigation, pushing forward the first iteration of the container, work was very clear and was very well fleshed out because it was like the scope of what we wanted to achieve. Well, it was clear. It was easy to just like break down those issues in settings and navigation into work that was like easy to achieve in a milestone. So besides looking at process, and I think that looking at process is really, really important. And a lot of the ideas that we've discussed here are really good. Perhaps we should also look at this situation contextually. So what has been the last 2 months about? It's been about a lot of research and investigation and understanding what our product direction should be for this year. And that probably hurt our numbers. But what we should do now is just like take all of this knowledge and retake the practice of just like converting that into a concrete plan for what we want to achieve over the next quarters.
And I think that's exactly right. And also, once you start building out issues from the preserve unchanged markdown, we're going to have a lot of really small scoped issues to tackle. So if you're looking for predictability and deliverables, I think we're on the horizon seeing that change. So you're right. We've been planning a lot of big things. We shouldn't look at the numbers in isolation.
Yeah, it's a very, very good point, Enrique. Contextually is great. And again, whenever I bring up anything like this is never in any aspect of blame or we're not doing things right. This is always just a check-in with us to make sure that people are happy with the process. It makes sense for them because we deliver a lot of kick-ass work. So I'm not worried about that.
Well, I think it's you know, I think the process can be improved, and yeah, it's not in a matter of blame, but like I know it's going to affect the quality attributes of our organization so much to where different people can hop in and out of the issues. The plan is clear. Like, I would like to propose that we start seriously considering adopting the terminology of are we creating an architecture from this, or are we creating an iteration plan? And architecture is very coupled with requirements, and have we validated the requirements in our approach to this? And that's very big. And you want to get all the requirements there, because one requirement that's critical to the user could completely change how we need to architecture something. We can't iteratively add performance, And so we really need to validate what are the requirements to the user, and is this approach going to work? That's one huge step. And that's a spike of, is this architecture going to work? And then what could be another spike, and maybe it's not even a spike, and it's just, okay, now we got to do this. Now we got to plan it, and let's do the iteration plan. And so I would really like for us to maybe adopt that terminology of, we need to do this architecture validation. We have an architecture plan and the iteration plan. And if we don't have right now, we don't have a solid artifact for, this is the architecture plan for the VS Code spike. So that's something on me that needs to be an artifact that we need to create. We're doing a lot of requirements validation there. And I kind of have steps I need to do. I could probably create smaller issues to help me complete that final artifact. So that it's just not all in my head of like, oh, I know I need to do these things. And it's a tough problem because it's very ambiguous, but I do feel like there's a lot to gain when we can break it out, and I think we can. And so I'm encouraged to do that. I want to.
I like that a lot. I also think that it helps spread the workload. So if, for example, we're coming up on VS Code and I've asked you and David to prepare for AppSec review and stuff like that, if there's an artifact there that needs to be created that David can help you with, he can assign himself to that issue, or someone else on the team could pick up for you. It doesn't all have to be on one person for this spike. We generally have subject matter experts, and so it falls on somebody's shoulders a lot, but it doesn't have to be that way. So yeah, I agree with that.
I think that's a really good point. Like, there's the sayings like Yagni, you ain't gonna need it, and you don't optimize for performance up front. But the nuance to that is, like, if you know you're going to have to reach a certain scale, like, you don't do things that are obviously stupid, or that are obviously going to break, or that are one-way doors that are going to be really hard to change later. So you don't do big design up front, but you also don't do dumb things. You think really hard about what you're doing.
Yeah, and on that quote, you don't do big design up front. I think this is where design and architecture separate, because it's like, architecture is, you want to do the big architecture up front. Like, is this going to work at scale? And there's ways to do that, but not at a more granular design level.
And there's like an endless number of examples of where we failed at that in the history of GitLab.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Fran probably sure doesn't know anything about that, right?
Yeah, I know. I'm getting very waterfall with my terminology right now, so forgive me if I start, I don't know, if I start complaining about why are we doing all this testing up front? Testing's the last step. I'm joking. Cool. The other question I had, and we can move on, and thanks for taking time on this, and we can talk about it more in the retro, and hopefully I'll be able to make that. But maybe it's helpful for us to break out our say-do ratio between spiky things and non-spiky things. Is that, maybe that's not what we're measured on, but maybe that's even something that'd be helpful for us to, having that separation of issues can be helpful for even the whole company to see, like, are we spending all our time on spiky things? I don't know.
Yeah, I think that falls in line really well with your terminology of architecture validation iteration plan. A lot of what we've been doing in the last couple of months has been architecture validation, and we will be slowly moving into these granular iteration plans. Again, it's not a metric I was super heavily tracking at the moment, because a lot of what we had been doing is research and validation. So I'm trying to set us up for success as we move into creating our iteration plans, and see if there's anything anybody would like, or if there are approaches to it that people feel are better than others. But that's a good point to keep in mind, and that's something that I do communicate. We do a lot of research in the last couple of months.
Is there any metrics around that? Is there any like is that something we could maybe promote across GitLab just to keep an eye on? Of I think it falls so in line with all the agile stuff Chad talks about of having more visibility on the types of issues being done, whether it's refactoring work, bug work, or like large. I feel like there's a category we're not watching, which is this large architecture work. I don't know if other people, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know if
That's an interesting one to watch. I currently don't. I'll link our metrics dashboard, which is where I take most of our metrics from. I currently don't have anything like that, but I could definitely create a panel for long-lived issues that relate to being architecture plans or spikes. It shouldn't be hard to add in something.
we have like type feature. I feel like we should have like a type architecture or something, like something that's beyond. Somehow I feel like feature may need to be split up, but I'm just thinking way out loud, and we could talk about it more later. So thanks for
Good question. Good question.
Cool. Enrique, you have some questions.
Yes. So my first question is about the static site editor. So we spent a couple of weeks researching a way of providing an alternative for after the removal of this feature. So what is our decision in here? Eric, I know that you have a comment in there.
Yeah, so just to summarize, the investigation was prompted by just a hope that there would be a lightweight solution to get this in the web editors and offer an alternative solution for people who might be looking for a visual markdown editor and can no longer find one in the product. It's become clear that it's more complex than that. So it's not a blocker to remove the static site editor. We got approval, and frankly, it's not impacting enough people to hold up our other work. And the way I see it, swarming on the preservation of unchanged markdown is the first step towards getting to the point where we can offer this experience, which will benefit far more people than the static site editor ever did. But we need to do it right. I don't want to hack something together and then have a bunch of like lost data because we aren't preserving cram down syntax or something like that, right? There's challenges to overcome before we get there, and that's okay. So for those people that are looking for a WYSIWYG editor, we can maybe get to the point by 15.0 where we can talk about our strategy and maybe even have a sense of when we might have an alternative, but we don't need to have it in place, if that kind of makes sense.
Yes, it makes sense. Really, I think that we should do the minimal amount of work here, and I think that redirecting just to a source editor is the easiest thing to do. Mm-hmm. We can probably put that time, that capacity in something that is more aligned with our direction.
And the redirect's done as of yesterday. As soon as Fran reviews it, doesn't make me do more work.
We'll get off this call and start. I'm just kidding. This is yeah. So again, it's not a blocker. It's a nice to have. We will push in this direction as soon as we're ready. I can see by the end of the year, I would love to have content editor loading in the web IDE/web editor and in issues. And to get there, first thing we need to do is figure out how to preserve the unchanged markdown so we don't end up with those noisy MRs and a bunch of deleted content.
Thank you, Eric. So my second question. Oh, sorry, Paul. You have a comment here. Do you want to memorize it?
No, Eric already kind of answered it. I was just wondering, like, is it worth creating a feature flagged version just for these 100-ish users to opt into? But it sounds like we wouldn't even. It sounds like there's blocking issues even supporting what they would currently use. So it's not a big deal. I was just
Cool.
asking.
Okay, so I'm gonna jump into my next question. First, I'm very excited about the VS Code adoption, where all of the out of the box benefits that we are getting. However, I'd like to know, like, we are getting this tool, how those VS Code align with our vision in terms of delivering a source editing experience in the product. What do we want? What new, like, I think this is very important, like mainly what new user experiences do we want to enable once we have like VS Code integrating into a product? I know that this is like question probably for another meeting, a whole meeting, but if we have a rough idea, it would be amazing.
It's a great idea. David and I have been talking about this a lot. This is probably the thing that's been the top of mind for me as I've evaluated the opportunity and what it means for our long-term strategy. I wish I had a better answer. I think we need to learn a little more before I can say for sure there's clarity. But there, in my mind, will always be a need for source editing inside GitLab. We should consider the VS Code IDE, the web IDE running VS Code, as a separate editing experience. It is a more fully featured end-to-end integrated development environment. That doesn't mean that we won't need the source editor or something similar to work consistently across GitLab. And what it will probably do is shift our focus for that over the next year or two to offer more tailored solutions like lightweight multi-file editing, like the in-context editing we talk about in snippets where you kind of just toggle between without switching views. Those kinds of editing experiences would be more important when we have the web IDE running on VS Code, because they're probably, my assumption is that more people might get intimidated by the clutter of VS Code and want to actually just edit in something a little more lightweight. Those all need to be validated though. Those are just my assumptions and anecdotal experiences that I've heard from people. There's another option that we can go down, and whether or not we can strip away the core of VS Code and use it like we use the source editor elsewhere in the GitLab experience for consistency. I just don't know if that's going to be possible. We can talk about that more in a longer meeting and when Paul is had time to research that. And generally though, the other thing we want to look at is once we have VS Code and an extensible web IDE, what experiences should we inject into that web IDE outside of our VS Code extension, that our workflow extension that already exists? Do we invest in, for example, I was spitballing with David, should we encourage the pipeline editor team to build an extension that runs both in desktop and web and moves out of the GitLab UI and does even more validation? Should we try and build more partnerships and alliances with things that would offer like more code completion or AI and ML? Like it offers us the opportunity to enhance those user experiences down the road, especially when and if we have some kind of server runtime available and we can actually compile code. Until then, it might be more like, you know, looking at the output of a security scan or something like that in the IDE. Even though it becomes stale as soon as you edit, it could be valuable. All of these things would be things we would partner with other groups on. These aren't extensions we'd have to write alone, but those are the opportunities that I'm looking at.
Thanks, Eric.
We were half distracted in the chat those last 5 minutes. Thanks for bringing up the question, Enrique.
That's right. You all can just watch my rant on that later, since you weren't listening.
You said as soon as Paul, my heart skipped a beat. You said as soon as Paul does more research on that. I was like, whoa, I wasn't listening.
Well, I've asked you to evaluate ACE. I've asked you to evaluate ACE as an alternative approach to, just kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
that
got a
was a real.
couple. I got a couple extra minutes. I want Chad to get to his though.
So, yeah, we're almost at time, but this should be quick. Fran asked me the same question right before the meeting, so I thought I'd answer for everybody. The plan is, fingers crossed, wrapping up the last security issue that I'm working on. Paul's got the other one remaining one for our team. Maybe I'll help him with that. And then I'm going to move on to this. And the reason I'm doing it is like this started end of 2020, like when we're like, yeah, when we refactored snippets to view, we didn't port the captcha stuff over. Can you just port that over? And that was like unraveling a sweater of technical debt. But the good news is like it's in a really good place. The client's almost completely rewritten, tons of great input from Lucas, and the GraphQL and the controllers as well to this new approach. It's a lot cleaner. It's set up to plug in new captcha implementations as well, which is one of the big things they have going forward. And I thought I was done, and I went to write the docs, and I'm like, wait, there's the whole REST API thing. It is like this odd person out that's not matching the others and still has technical debt. It makes sense for me to finish that, which I'm hoping isn't that hard. All of the docs are written basically except the REST API, the developer docs. And I realized, I was like, oh, like this thing is completely different than the other stuff and doesn't make sense to even document that way. It needs to be like everything else. So that's the plan. And then at that point, there's, out of the last security allocation, like a year and a half ago, I got assigned like add captcha to notes randomly because I was the captcha person at that time. Luckily now it's the access team. Once I write the docs, if I've done everything right, that should be straightforward and easy to do if all of these refactorings work and it's documented well. At that point, I've discussed with David Eric and Hannah Suter, there's like this giant epic with like 12 sections of 5 or a half dozen things each that are all related to captcha. All of that is going to get handed over to access and say, do with it what you will. The first thing that needs to be done is all of this needs to be triaged and prioritized and looked at from a security perspective, but none of that will be ours. But finishing these refactors and handing it off at a clean, well-documented, proven working state for them to add to all of the other areas of the app that don't have captcha, which is actually a security hole. That's the plan. I think everybody's on board with it.
Chad, I totally forgot, but I think that was kind of reassigned to some team handling the spam thing.
Yes,
Or
captcha
anything?
is, that was a battle in itself, but it is now in the handbook that captcha owns all of this. But to
Manage.
do this final refactor in a consistent way and to finish the docs that I've already written sort of makes sense for me to do, I think, for the company.
So, but the question is, has that team done anything to what you deliver?
No, they're busy with their own things like everybody else. But
They've been
that's
under
not my
allocation.
concern.
Yeah.
Handing this off cleanly is my only concern, and this last refactor in the docs is, and proving that it works is all I'm considering part of what I'm doing.
Yeah, and that's a really good initiative.
Yeah, I'll link right here the epic of everything. But that's it.
And a related side note, David, when you went through the editor stuff, did you happen to know if you could test any of the captcha behavior of the Apollo 3 upgrade? When you
I didn't, but I can spin it back up and have a
Well,
check. Luckily for us, all the editor stuff still
there
works.
might be some setup required for that, and I know Chad has some setup. Do you have that set up for manually verifying captcha that shows up?
Yeah, it's that epic that I just linked there. It's sort of at the bottom of that. That one's a little bit outdated. That is part of the docs that I have in process Then Amy started reviewing, and then I'm like, wait, this isn't done. Never mind.
Okay, I pinged you on this Apollo 3 upgrade, MR, Chad, because I think this
Okay.
may be a feature we haven't quite verified, because we're upgrading all of Apollo, and this was implemented using like Apollo middleware stuff. So we just want to confirm
Mhm.
this is all still works. So if you think you could test it, that'd be great. Or if there's instructions on how someone else can test it.
I can do it, and there's
cool.
instructions too.
Awesome. I just pinged you on it. So yeah, thanks for bringing this up, Chad.
Nice. Fantastic call out, Paul. Thank you very much for that. And thank you, Chad.
We made it through. That was quite an agenda. Thanks everyone for your thoughts. It's good to have pretty much the whole team. Well, I guess this is a whole team because Himanshu's unfortunately leaving us next week. So yeah, it's great to have everybody back and 2 new members. So we'll see you next week, hopefully.
Just one thing before we break, since we have so many people here. I'm going to pause the recording. I'm going to stop the recording first.